Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. I never believed in the supernatural. I was always the logical type, grounded in the tangible world, the one who scoffed at ghost stories and dismissed the so-called cursed objects as pure superstition. That was until the day I made the mistake of buying an antique mirror from a forsaken estate sale. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find a treasure. The house was a decaying relic on the edge of town, forgotten by time and shrouded in the kind of eerie silence that makes you question if anyone had actually lived there. The sky that afternoon was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain. The wind howled through the alleyways, rattling loose shutters on the old buildings around me. Yet, something about the house drew me in. Maybe it was the quiet hum of curiosity, or maybe just the need for something new. But whatever it was, it led me into the dim, dusty rooms of that place. The air was thick with dust and the musty scent of forgotten memories. The floorboards creaked underfoot, protesting with each step, as though the house itself was alive, mourning the intrusion. In the midst of all the forgotten clutter, I saw it. A mirror, standing tall in the corner of the drawing room. It seemed out of place, almost regal amid the old books and tarnished furniture. At first glance, I knew it was something special. The frame was intricately carved, dark wood swirling into strange patterns I couldn't quite make out. Symbols, almost, but not ones I recognized. There was something about them that tugged at me, an inexplicable familiarity that both intrigued and unsettled me. The glass, though old, slightly tarnished, seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light, like it held secrets buried deep within its surface. I couldn't help myself. I moved closer, feeling the hair on the back of my neck rise, but I ignored it. This was just a mirror, after all. What could be so strange about it? The man running the estate sale, an elderly figure with a haggard face, appeared beside me as if he'd been waiting for me to notice it. He didn't look at me directly, his eyes instead flicking toward the mirror with an odd mixture of wariness and resignation. "It's a unique piece," he murmured, his voice rough, as if speaking of something forbidden. "Came from a place far from here, a place you wouldn't want to know about." I didn't pay much attention to his words at first. Who was he to tell me where the mirror came from? But when he looked at the mirror, his expression shifted. His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes darting to the shadows, as if expecting something to reach out from the dark. "The mirror," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "was once owned by a woman of great power. A witch, they say." His words hung in the air, and I couldn't quite tell if he was trying to warn me or if he simply believed in the nonsense he was spouting. I was about to dismiss it. An old man rambling on about curses and witches, but he spoke again, more urgently this time. "It's not just a reflection you'll see in it. You'd be wise not to buy it. You're inviting something into your life if you do." I chuckled, trying to brush off the unease creeping into my chest. "It's just a mirror, old man," I said, my voice dismissive. "I'll take it. It's beautiful, and I don't believe in such things." But even as I spoke those words, something about the mirror seemed to watch me, its glass reflecting something I couldn't quite place. The old man seemed to know it too. He didn't argue further. His gaze lingered on me, full of sorrow, as though he understood something I didn't, before he slowly turned and walked away. I didn't understand his warning. I thought it was just superstition, the ramblings of an old man who had too many stories stuck in his head. And so, with a sense of pride for having found such a beautiful piece, I made the arrangements to have the mirror delivered to my home. I didn't think about it much as I walked away. It was just a mirror. What harm could there be? But the moment the mirror was placed in my living room, I began to notice something strange. It was subtle at first, distorted reflections like ripples in water whenever I passed by it. I told myself it was nothing more than the glass being old, the way light played tricks on the eyes. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One night, as I stood before it adjusting my tie, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My reflection, it wasn't mine, at least not entirely. It was twisted, grinning back at me with an expression that I knew wasn't my own. The eyes, they were wrong. Hollow, black. I stepped back, heart pounding, but when I looked again, it was gone. I was staring at my own reflection, just as I should have been. I thought I was imagining things. Surely I had been. But the next time I looked, it wasn't just my face. It was her face. Eleanor, my wife. In the reflection, she stood in the kitchen, completely unaware of the looming danger behind her. A dark figure, tall, looming, a shadow, was rising from the floor, moving silently toward her. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure's hands were outstretched, fingers curling like claws. I turned around, expecting to see Eleanor standing there, oblivious. But the kitchen was empty. She wasn't there. The room was still. I could feel the air in my lungs freeze. I rushed to find her, panicked, calling her name. She was in the next room, reading a book, completely unaware of the vision I had seen. She smiled at me, but I couldn't shake the dread in my heart. I had just seen something horrible in the mirror, and I couldn't explain it. I didn't even know what it meant. That night, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, maybe. But as I lay in bed, my mind kept returning to that mirror. It wasn't just reflecting the present. No, it was showing me something else, something darker, something more dangerous. And that's when I began to wonder, was I seeing the future? And if I was, could I change it? But every time I tried to intervene, every time I thought I could stop the visions, the consequences were always worse than I could have imagined. The mirror wasn't just showing me what could happen, it was making it happen. And now, it was too late to escape. I've never believed in curses. Never believed in ghosts either. I was always the kind of man who laughed at superstition, who dismissed things like haunted houses and cursed objects as nothing more than stories. But now, as I sit here in the dark, my skin crawling with an unease I can't shake, I know with a certainty that gnaws at my very soul, that I was wrong. It all began with that damn mirror. I don't know what made me stop at that estate sale. Maybe it was the weather. Gray skies, the kind of wind that makes you want to pull your coat tighter and hurry along. But something pulled me inside, past the broken windows and through the creaking door of that abandoned house. It wasn't much, just a house full of junk and cobwebs, but there was a strange sense of history hanging in the air. The kind of place that makes you think you're walking through time. That's when I saw it. The mirror. I don't know what drew me to it. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. The frame was ornate, almost unnervingly so, with dark, twisting carvings that seemed to shift when you looked away. The glass itself was old, tarnished in places, but it held an almost unnatural gleam. There was something about it that felt wrong. But I didn't know that then. I bought it. I paid for it, had it delivered. There was no reason not to. I didn't believe in such things. When it arrived, I hung it up in the living room, right where it seemed to belong. Eleanor didn't say much. She's always been a little sensitive to things like this, but she trusted me, and I thought it would be nothing more than an interesting conversation piece. But I didn't realize what I had brought into our home. At first, everything seemed fine. But as I began spending more time near the mirror, I started to feel uneasy. It was subtle at first, just a weird feeling when I passed by it, like something was watching me. I laughed it off. Old glass, old wood. Maybe it was the lighting, casting strange shadows that my mind was playing tricks on. Then, one night, everything changed. I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie before heading out to dinner with some old colleagues. The light in the room was soft, filtered through the heavy curtains. I wasn't thinking about the mirror. I wasn't thinking about anything, really. But when I glanced at my reflection, I froze. My reflection was wrong. The edges of my face, my eyes, my mouth, began to stretch and distort, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. My lips pulled back into a grotesque grin, far too wide, until it felt like my skin might tear under the pressure. My eyes turned black, hollow, like endless pits. It wasn't me. It couldn't be me. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I looked again, the reflection was normal, just me. Just the man I recognized. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something inside the mirror had shifted, something darker. My mind raced, trying to explain what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, some strange reflection. But I knew deep down something wasn't right. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the mirror, about that awful reflection. It nagged at me. I couldn't dismiss it. And the more I thought about it, the more I started seeing things in the reflection that weren't real, things that weren't there when I turned my head. The next evening, I walked past it again, and this time, something was different. I saw her. In the reflection, I saw Eleanor standing in the kitchen, completely unaware. But behind her, in the dark corner of the room, something moved. A figure. Tall. Shadowed. A presence I couldn't place. She didn't see it, didn't feel it, but I could see it. I could see it crawling toward her. My stomach dropped. I turned around, heart pounding, expecting to see the same figure in the kitchen. But there was nothing. Eleanor was standing there, chopping vegetables, humming to herself, completely unaware of the danger that hovered inches from her. I ran to her, grabbed her by the arm, shaking her. She looked at me, confused, as I tried to explain what I had seen, what I felt had been there. But she laughed it off. She always did. She's the logical one, the calm one. I'm the one who gets worked up over nothing. That's when I started to get scared. The next few days were a blur of increasing paranoia. The mirror began showing me more. It didn't just show reflections of what was, it showed what could be. Or maybe it showed what would be. I don't know anymore. But every time I looked into it, I saw Eleanor in danger. Trapped in a burning building. Drowning in a car that had rolled into a lake. The images were so vivid, so real, that I couldn't just ignore them. I tried to stop them. I tried to prevent what I saw, but nothing worked. The more I tried to intervene, the worse it got. Every time I attempted to stop the tragedy, it only made it happen. One night, after seeing Eleanor trapped in a burning house in the mirror's reflection, I ran out to find her. I couldn't wait to see if it was real. But when I burst into the house, I found her sitting on the couch reading a book. No fire, no danger. But something had changed in me. I couldn't explain it, but the mirror had me in its grip. The visions were growing stronger, clearer, and more terrifying. The dark presence that had hovered around Eleanor in the reflection was now following me. I could feel it, creeping in the corners of my vision, in the coldness of the room. And that's when I realized it wasn't just a mirror. It wasn't just showing me the future. It was manipulating it. It was feeding on my fear, on my desperation. Every time I tried to prevent what I saw, I only made it worse. The mirror was alive. It wasn't until I saw the last vision, my death, that I understood the truth. The mirror had been guiding me all along, leading me into its web. It wasn't just a reflection of what could happen, it was showing me how to make it happen. And every time I tried to stop it, I only made it real. The mirror had me trapped. I was playing into its hands, and I didn't even realize it. And the worst part? I had no way out. I've always prided myself on being a rational man, grounded in logic. I scoffed at ghost stories and dismissed the idea of curses as nothing more than superstition. But all that changed the day I bought the mirror. It wasn't my idea to go to that estate sale. I don't even know why I went, to be honest. Maybe it was the weather. Gray clouds hanging low in the sky, the wind howling like a warning. Or maybe it was just the strange, irresistible pull of something out of place. But that old house on the edge of town had an aura about it, the kind of place you couldn't ignore. The kind of place that felt like it had a history. Inside, the house smelled of dust and forgotten memories. It was full of clutter, old books, faded portraits, and strange relics that felt like they belonged in a different time. But in the back corner, amidst all the clutter, I saw it. The mirror. It stood out like a sore thumb, ancient and imposing. The frame was dark, intricately carved with swirling patterns that I couldn't quite understand. Something about the design sent a chill through me, but I couldn't look away. There was something about it that called to me. The glass was old, tarnished in spots, but it gleamed in a way that didn't seem quite right. It wasn't just a mirror, it felt alive. The old man, running the estate sale, approached me. His eyes flicked to the mirror, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flash behind them. Fear, maybe. But he didn't say anything about it at first. His voice was gravelly when he spoke. "It's a rare piece," he said, almost too softly. "Belonged to a woman, someone with great power, but be careful with it. It's not just any mirror." I chuckled, dismissing his warning. "It's just a mirror," I said, brushing him off. I wasn't superstitious. A mirror couldn't hurt anyone. I paid for it, had it delivered, and thought no more of it. I hung it in the living room, a nice spot near the wall where it would catch the light. At first, it seemed harmless, just an old antique adding some character to the room. But the more I stared at it, the more I began to notice things, distortions. Small, barely noticeable at first, a slight bend in my reflection, a flicker in the light. I tried to ignore it. Old glass, old wood, no big deal, right? But then it happened. One evening, after a long day, I stood before it adjusting my tie, getting ready to head out for a dinner I'd been invited to. The room was quiet, just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. When I looked at the mirror, I saw my reflection. Or, at least, I thought I did. At first, it was just a little off. My face seemed to shift, like I was wearing a mask, stretching and warping unnaturally. My eyes, they weren't my eyes. They were wide, too wide, and black, deep, empty holes staring back at me. The skin around my mouth pulled into a grin that was not mine, too wide, too jagged, stretching beyond what was humanly possible. I stepped back, my heart thundering in my chest. What the hell was happening? I turned around, but there was nothing behind me. When I looked back into the mirror, my face had returned to normal. Just me, just David. But the unease stayed with me, gnawing at my mind. Later that night, I told Eleanor about it. She laughed it off, of course, she always did. "It's probably just the glass, David. You're tired. You've been working too hard." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But that night, the feeling didn't go away. And then, the next time I stood in front of the mirror, it wasn't just my reflection. It was her. Eleanor. I don't know what I expected to see, but it sure as hell wasn't that. In the reflection, she was standing in the kitchen, her back turned, chopping vegetables. The room looked normal, just like it always did. But there was something wrong. The air grew colder, thicker, and the shadows in the room seemed to move, stretching out like hands reaching for her. I leaned in closer, my breath shallow, my heart racing. I couldn't look away. In the reflection, I saw the figure, a shape, tall, dark, looming in the corner of the kitchen, standing still, its eyes never blinking. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I could see it. It was real. It was there. Eleanor, in the reflection, was oblivious to the looming figure. She was still humming, still chopping, unaware of the dark presence inching toward her. It took all of my strength not to scream, to run over to her, to warn her, but I couldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the reflection. The figure's hand, its fingers, long and sharp, moved toward her. It reached out slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. And then, it was almost touching her, its fingers mere inches from her skin. I tried to scream, tried to shout, but no sound came out. And then, nothing. The figure vanished. The kitchen returned to normal. The room was still. Eleanor was still there, chopping away, completely unaware of the danger that had been right behind her just moments ago. I was breathless, my mind spinning. I ran into the kitchen, half mad with fear. But Eleanor was fine. She looked up at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "David, what's wrong with you?" "Did you see it?" I asked, breathless, my voice trembling. "Did you see the shadow, the figure in the kitchen?" She laughed, dismissing it as nothing more than stress. But I couldn't shake the image of that thing. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a hallucination, that it was real. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing it in my mind, the figure, the dark presence, its eyes that were nothing but empty sockets, and its claws reaching for Eleanor. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that it was nothing. But the feeling, the dread, didn't leave me. Every time I looked into the mirror, I felt the weight of it. I knew something was wrong. That mirror. It wasn't just showing me reflections. It was showing me something else. Something terrible. I should have gotten rid of it. I should have listened to my instincts and thrown it out. But I didn't. I couldn't. And that's when I realized the mirror wasn't just reflecting what was. It was showing me what could be, or what would be. And the worst part? Every time I tried to stop the things it showed me, I only made them come true. I never believed in curses. I always prided myself on being a man of logic, someone who scoffed at ghost stories and dismissed the idea of haunted objects as mere superstition. But that was before I brought the mirror into my home. It all started on an impulse. The day I found the mirror, I wasn't even looking for it. It was one of those estate sales, the kind you go to out of curiosity, not expecting to find anything of value. The house was decrepit, weathered by time, with a thick layer of dust coating everything inside. But something about that mirror, it caught my eye immediately. It stood in the corner of the dimly lit room, framed in dark wood with intricate carvings that seemed to shift when I glanced away. The glass was old, tarnished in places, but still it gleamed, almost as if it was alive, calling to me. I didn't know it then, but that mirror had been waiting for me. The old man running the sale didn't say much at first, but when I touched the mirror's frame, he seemed to hesitate. "That's a special piece," he muttered, his voice almost a whisper. It belonged to someone. Someone who had great power. Be careful with it. I dismissed him as just another eccentric, but there was something in his eyes, something that made me shiver. A look that spoke of secrets better left untouched. I didn't listen to him. I bought the mirror, had it delivered, and hung it in the living room without a second thought. That's when everything started to change. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The mirror reflected the usual. Our old furniture, the clutter on the coffee table, the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. But then, one night, something caught my eye. I was standing in front of it, adjusting my tie, getting ready for a dinner, when I saw myself, or what I thought was myself. My reflection was different. It wasn't me at all. My face was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. My eyes were black, hollow, and lifeless. The smile on my face twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that, I was back to normal. Just David Harrow looking back at myself from the mirror. But the feeling lingered, like a chill settling deep in my bones. I tried to brush it off. Old glass, old wood, faulty lighting. But that night, as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about it, about how wrong it had felt. It wasn't just a trick of the eye, it was something else. And that wasn't the worst of it. No, that came the following night. I was standing in the living room again, mindlessly walking past the mirror when I saw her. Eleanor, my wife. She was standing in the kitchen in the reflection, completely unaware of the figure standing just behind her. I blinked, and the figure shifted. It was dark, shadowed, humanoid, but its features were too distorted to make out. I could feel it in my chest, in the pit of my stomach. A presence, a malice that radiated from it, like it was watching her, waiting. I turned quickly to check the kitchen, but there was nothing there. Eleanor was chopping vegetables, humming to herself, completely unaware of the danger in the reflection. But in that mirror, that figure, it was real. I could feel it. And that feeling didn't fade. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was nothing more than a trick of the light, but I couldn't. I knew what I had seen. The mirror was showing me something beyond just what was. It was showing me what could be. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when the mirror started to show me more. The next night I saw her again, Eleanor in the reflection. But this time the figure wasn't just lurking behind her. No, this time the figure was coming closer. The shadow grew larger and more distinct, its long arms reaching out, its claws hovering just behind her, ready to strike. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull her away, to warn her, to make sure she was safe. But when I turned around, there was no danger. The room was still. Eleanor was standing there, perfectly safe, unaware of the horror unfolding in the mirror. And then I understood. The mirror wasn't just showing me things, it was manipulating them. Every time I tried to prevent something from happening, it only made it worse. Every time I tried to stop the tragedy I saw, I only pushed it closer to reality. I became desperate. I tried everything, telling Eleanor, locking the mirror away, even covering it with a cloth, but nothing worked. The visions grew worse, more terrifying, more real. The figure in the mirror grew stronger, more present. And soon it wasn't just Eleanor in danger, it was me, too. And that's when I saw her. The witch. One night, as I stared into the mirror, the room around me seemed to darken. The shadows grew deeper, thicker, and the air felt heavier. I couldn't move. I felt a presence, like something was watching me from the reflection. I tried to pull away, but the mirror pulled me in. and for the first time, I felt the true power of what it had become. The reflection wasn't just a mirror anymore, it was a gateway. And then I saw her, a woman standing in the corner of the room. She was tall, too tall, and her limbs stretched in unnatural ways, gnarled and twisted like the branches of a dead tree. Her skin was pale, cracked in places, and her eyes were nothing but empty, black sockets. Her mouth was a thin line, twisted into a jagged grin. The sight of her made my chest tighten with terror, but I couldn't look away. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice like 1,000 other voices layered over each other, all ancient and dead. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. But it wasn't just her presence that terrified me. It was the power she held, the way the room around me began to warp, as if the very fabric of reality was bending in her presence. I tried to speak, to move, but my body felt like it was frozen in place. "You're not the first," she crooned, her smile widening, her teeth too sharp, too long. "You won't be the last. I've been waiting for someone like you, someone to break the veil between worlds. You thought you could escape. You thought you could stop it." She reached out, her fingers elongated, stretching unnaturally long. And as she touched the glass, I felt a chill seep into my bones, a cold that froze me from the inside out. My mind screamed at me to run, to destroy the mirror, to do anything to escape. But it was too late. The curse had already been set in motion. Suddenly, the reflection shifted. The witch was gone, but her presence lingered, suffocating the air around me. I was back in the living room, staring at the mirror, and yet I knew. I knew that I had unleashed something far worse than I could ever comprehend. The mirror wasn't just a window into the future, it was a prison. And the witch, the spirit, had been waiting for someone to break the rules, waiting for someone to bring her back. And now it was too late. I had broken the curse only to release it into the world. I could feel her watching me still, through the glass, through the shadows. The witch was free, and she was waiting. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to believe in curses. My whole life, I prided myself on being a man of reason, skeptical, grounded in logic. I'd scoff at ghost stories, laugh off the idea of haunted objects, dismiss it all as pure superstition. But I was wrong, completely wrong. It all started with the mirror. I don't know what made me buy it. I wasn't even looking for something like that. But there I was, standing in the midst of an old estate sale, the kind of sale where everything feels like it's been forgotten, like it should be left to gather dust forever. The house was old, creaky, the air thick with the smell of mildew and time. I wasn't interested in the cluttered bookshelves or the piles of decaying furniture, but then, there it was, the mirror. I saw it, standing alone in the back corner of the room. It was tall, regal, almost otherworldly. The frame was dark, intricately carved with twisting patterns that seemed to shift when I looked away. The glass wasn't perfect. It was aged, with small cracks and spots, but something about it called to me, like it was waiting. And in that moment I thought, this could be a perfect addition to the living room. The old man running the estate sale seemed hesitant when I approached it, his eyes flicking nervously toward the mirror. "That's not just any mirror," he said, his voice low, almost fearful. "It belonged to someone, powerful, a woman. You should be careful with it." I laughed it off, dismissing his words as nonsense. "It's just a mirror," I said, taking it down and paying for it, the strange unease lingering in the air around us. When I brought it home and hung it in the living room, Eleanor didn't say much. She gave it a cursory glance but didn't think much of it. She was used to my odd taste in decor, but there was something about it, something about that mirror that made my skin crawl. I couldn't explain it. Every time I walked past it, I felt a coldness, an unsettling energy that made me shiver. At first, nothing happened. The mirror reflected the usual, our worn couch, the coffee table cluttered with books and magazines. But then, one night I looked into it and saw myself. Or what I thought was myself. I was standing there, adjusting my tie, when I noticed that the reflection wasn't quite right. My face, it was twisted, grinning unnaturally. My eyes were dark, too dark, and my mouth stretched into a smile that was far too wide, far too sharp. I blinked, and it was gone. I looked at myself again, and there I was, just me, the way I should be. But the feeling, the dread that came with it, stayed. It lingered, and I couldn't shake it. The next night, the reflections in the mirror weren't just odd, they were disturbing. As I passed by it again, I saw Eleanor in the kitchen. At first, everything seemed normal. She was chopping vegetables, humming softly to herself. But then I saw it. Behind her, standing in the shadows, there was a figure. Dark, tall, looming. At first, it was a mere shape in the corner of the reflection, a flicker in the shadows. But as I watched, it grew more distinct. A figure, a presence. It didn't belong. And it wasn't just standing there, it was moving, slowly, deliberately, towards her. I turned around, heart pounding, expecting to see some intruder in the kitchen, but there was nothing. Eleanor was still standing there, blissfully unaware. But the reflection, it showed a completely different story. That dark figure was getting closer, reaching out with long, gnarled fingers, and my chest tightened with terror. I tried to call to her, but no words came. The figure's fingers were now inches from her, reaching toward her throat. But just as I tried to move to shout, everything shifted. The figure disappeared. The kitchen returned to normal. Eleanor was still there, still chopping vegetables, as though nothing had happened. I froze. My mind couldn't process what I'd just seen. I ran to the kitchen, looking around wildly, but there was nothing. No dark figure, no danger, just Eleanor, safe and unaware of the hell I had just witnessed in the reflection. I didn't know what to think. Was I going crazy? Was this some trick of the mind, some manifestation of stress? But I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was showing me something real, something terrible, something coming. And the more I tried to intervene, the worse it seemed to get. The more I watched, the more real the danger became. The mirror wasn't just showing me the future, it was shaping it, manipulating it, making the very things I feared come to life. I tried to keep my paranoia hidden from Eleanor, but the truth was, I couldn't escape it. I was sinking deeper and deeper into the terror that mirror was feeding me. Every time I looked into it, it showed me something more horrifying, something more impossible. But what terrified me most was that each time I couldn't stop it. The more I tried to change the outcome, the more real it became. It was like the mirror had power over me, over everything I did. One night, I couldn't keep it in anymore. Eleanor was sitting in the living room, reading a book, her soft hum filling the quiet. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the distorted reflection of myself. The fear had consumed me, and I could feel it bubbling to the surface. "Eleanor," I said, my voice trembling. "There's something wrong with that mirror. Something is watching us. Something evil." She looked up from her book, her brow furrowing in concern. "David, you're not making sense. What do you mean? It's just a mirror." I shook my head, my voice growing frantic. "No, it's not. It's not just a mirror. It's showing me things that are going to happen, things I can't stop, and I think it's coming for you." She stood up, walking toward me, her expression softening, but there was something else in her eyes. Recognition. She had always been attuned to things that I couldn't see, things I never wanted to believe in. But she looked at me with a mixture of concern and something else. Fear. "David, listen to me," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I've felt it too. There's something wrong here, something in the air, but the mirror, it's not just showing you the future, it's twisting it, making you believe that these things are real when they don't have to be. It's manipulating you." I stared at her, horrified. She knew, she understood. I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear I felt gnawing at my own soul. And in that moment I realized it was already too late. The mirror had already begun its work. "We have to destroy it," she said, her voice rising with urgency. "We need to get rid of it before it's too late." But I couldn't move. I couldn't act. The weight of the mirror's curse had already settled over us like a dark cloud. The witch was already inside. The mirror wasn't just showing us the future. It had become a gateway, and I had no idea how to close it. The shadows in the room grew darker, thicker, like they were listening to her words, waiting for her to do something, anything. And just as I looked back at the mirror, I knew. It was already too late. I never believed in curses, in haunted objects, or in anything that wasn't explainable. I was the type of person who scoffed at ghost stories and laughed off any talk of the supernatural. I always considered myself a man of reason, but then came the mirror, and with it, everything I thought I knew was shattered. I wasn't even looking for it. The day I found the mirror, I had no intention of buying anything. But there it was, standing in the back corner of an estate sale, gleaming like it was waiting for me. The frame was dark, heavy with intricate carvings that seemed to twist and shift as I looked away. The glass wasn't perfect, tarnished in spots, cracked in places, but still, it had a presence. It seemed alive. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The man running the sale, an elderly figure with sunken eyes, watched me as I approached. "That mirror, it's not like the others," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "It belonged to a woman, someone who had great power. Be careful with it." I shrugged off his words, thinking him just another eccentric. But there was something in his eyes, a warning, or maybe something else, something darker that I couldn't quite place. I bought it anyway, convinced it was just an antique, nothing more. When I brought it home and hung it in the living room, I felt the house change. The air seemed to shift, heavy with something I couldn't understand. Eleanor didn't notice anything. She never did. She was used to my quirks, to my taste for strange things. I didn't say much to her about it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. At first, nothing happened. I saw only the usual reflections in the mirror, the coffee table, the couch, the room as it was. But then I began to feel it. A subtle pull. Every time I passed the mirror, I felt eyes on me, like something was watching, waiting. The longer I stared into it, the more I felt the weight of it. The mirror wasn't just reflecting me, it was reaching for me. The first time I saw it, I thought I was imagining things. But the second time, I knew it was real. I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie before heading out to dinner with some colleagues. I glanced at my reflection, but it wasn't me. At least, not entirely. My face, it wasn't my face. The smile stretched too wide, my eyes too dark, like something was wrong. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced with the normal reflection. But the chill that ran through me didn't fade. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, just old glass. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I passed the mirror after that, the feeling grew stronger. This sense of watching. A presence in the reflection that I couldn't explain, but that I could feel. And then, It started showing me things. Eleanor didn't know, of course. She didn't see it. She never saw it. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what was happening. She'd laugh it off, dismiss it, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, I was standing in front of the mirror again, just passing by when I saw her. Eleanor, standing in the kitchen. But in the reflection, it wasn't just her. Behind her, in the corner of the room, was a figure, a shadow. Tall, dark, looming. It wasn't just a shadow, it was something else. The figure was moving, stepping closer to her, its long arms reaching out toward her. My heart stopped. I turned quickly, desperate to see if there was someone behind her. But when I looked into the kitchen, there was nothing. Eleanor was standing there, humming to herself, completely unaware of the figure in the reflection. I ran to her, my chest tight with panic, and grabbed her by the arm. "Eleanor," I gasped, "don't you see it?" "There's something in the reflection, something behind you." She looked at me, puzzled. "David, you're acting strange. You need to calm down. There's nothing there." But I saw it. The figure. It was there. It was real. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't make her see it. But every night after that, the visions grew more frequent, more intense. The mirror showed me things I couldn't control. It showed me Eleanor in danger, drowning, trapped in a burning house. Every time I tried to intervene, to stop what I saw, I only made it worse. Every time I tried to change the outcome, the future twisted itself in ways I couldn't undo. I was losing my mind. One night, after seeing yet another vision of Eleanor in peril, I couldn't take it anymore. I was desperate. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage, determined to destroy the mirror once and for all. My hands shook as I approached it, the weight of the fear bearing down on me. Eleanor wasn't home, and I thought, this is it. This is how I end it. I'll break it, and everything will go back to normal. I struck the mirror with the crowbar. Thwack! The glass cracked, a web of fractures spreading across the surface. I struck again, another crack. The room grew cold, and my heart pounded in my chest. But the mirror didn't break, it resisted me. The cracks began to shimmer, glowing with an eerie light, and I felt the pressure in the air grow heavier. The temperature dropped, and the whispers began. "You can't break me." I froze, the words seeping into my mind like poison. The witch, the presence, was speaking to me. She was inside the mirror, she was using it. I swung the crowbar again, desperation flooding my veins. The glass shattered, the pieces falling to the floor, but the presence remained. The shadows in the room grew longer, colder, as if the very walls of the house were closing in on me. I could hear the witch's voice, echoing in my head, whispering, "You freed me. You can't escape now." I stumbled back, my legs weak beneath me, my breath coming in gasps. The mirror. It wasn't just a reflection, it was a gateway. It had been calling to me, feeding on my fear, and now it was free. And the worst part? I knew the truth now. I had failed. I had tried to destroy it, but all I'd done was break open the prison the witch had been trapped in. She was no longer confined to the mirror. She was in the house with me. The air was thick with her presence, the shadows reaching out to claim me. I could feel her watching me, waiting. I had made a terrible mistake. I had thought I could destroy it, that I could change the future, but all I had done was unleash something far worse. Something that had been waiting for someone like me, someone foolish enough to believe they could control it. And now, as I stood there, trembling, I realized the truth. There was no escape. The witch had me now. She had always had me. I never thought this would happen to me. I never thought I'd be one of those people. The kind that sees things that aren't supposed to be real. The kind of person who gets trapped in a nightmare and can't escape, no matter how hard they try. But here I am, and this is my story. It started with the mirror. I wasn't even looking for it. It wasn't like I had some strange fascination with antiques or haunted objects or anything like that. But when I saw it at that estate sale, I couldn't stop myself. It was beautiful in a way that felt wrong. The frame was dark, carved with strange, intricate patterns that seemed to shift if you looked away too quickly. The glass was aged, tarnished with time, but still it gleamed like it was waiting for something. The old man who was running the sale looked at me strangely when I approached it. His eyes flickered nervously toward the mirror, and his voice dropped to a whisper when he spoke. That mirror? It belonged to someone with great power. You should be careful with it. I dismissed him as just some eccentric, but I can still see his face, that haunted look in his eyes. I bought the mirror anyway. I brought it home, hung it in the living room, and thought nothing more of it. But something in the house changed the moment it was in place. The air was heavier now, as if it was pressing down on me. It wasn't the kind of heaviness you'd expect from just an old object. It was something else, something I couldn't explain. At first, everything seemed fine, but soon enough I began to feel watched. Every time I passed by the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just behind me, staring over my shoulder. And I tried to ignore it, of course. Tried to tell myself it was nothing. It was just old glass. But then one night I stood before it and saw my reflection twist. At first, I thought it was nothing. But as I watched, the reflection of my face changed. My eyes, they weren't my eyes, they were dark, too dark. And the grin that spread across my face wasn't mine. It stretched too wide, far beyond what was humanly possible. I blinked, and the reflection was normal again, just me. But the fear clung to me like a cold sweat. I tried to ignore it. But the next night I saw her. Eleanor, my wife, was standing in the kitchen, the same as always. But in the reflection there was something else. A figure, a shadow, looming behind her. It stood still at first, hidden in the corner of the reflection, but I could feel its presence. It wasn't just a trick of the light. This was real. I turned quickly, heart hammering in my chest, but when I looked back at the kitchen, there was nothing. Just Eleanor, still chopping vegetables, unaware of the thing that was lurking in the shadows behind her. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to her, grabbed her arm, and spun her around. "Eleanor, there's someone behind you." She looked at me, confused, laughing softly. "David, you're imagining things. There's nothing there." But I saw it. I knew what I saw. The reflection. It wasn't just a reflection. The mirror was showing me something real, something that shouldn't exist. The days blurred together after that. I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror, about the things it showed me. It wasn't just reflections of the past, of the present. It was showing me the future. Or what could be the future. I didn't know. I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that every time I tried to stop it, to change what I saw, it only seemed to get worse. I'd see Eleanor in a burning house, or trapped in a sinking car. The visions grew stronger with each passing day, each time I stood in front of the mirror, and I tried to stop it. I tried to change things. I tried to protect her, to warn her, but every time I did, every time I interfered, it just happened anyway. That's when I knew something was wrong. That the mirror wasn't just showing me the future, it was manipulating it, feeding off my fear, my desperation. It wasn't just reflecting what was going to happen, it was forcing it to happen. I should have destroyed it. I should have listened to my instincts when I first saw it. But I didn't. I thought I could control it. That if I could just stop looking at it, stop interacting with it, I could make everything go back to normal. But every time I looked away, the reflection would pull me back, like an invisible hand dragging me toward it. And then it showed me her, the witch. I don't know how to explain it, but there she was, standing in the mirror. She was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that twisted in unnatural angles. Her skin was pale, cracked in places, as though it hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. Her eyes, empty sockets, just darkness. But she was smiling, or at least I think she was. Her lips stretched too wide, too far, until I couldn't look away. "You shouldn't have done this," she whispered, her voice like 1,000 whispers all layered over each other. "You freed me, and now you will pay." I froze. My heart stopped in my chest. She was talking to me. I had freed her. I had done this. I tried to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't work. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The witch in the mirror, the reflection, was real. She was alive, and she was here. And she was getting closer, stretching out toward me, her hands reaching through the glass as if she were coming to drag me in. I couldn't escape. I was already trapped. And that was when I understood. The mirror wasn't just reflecting reality. It was showing me what was always meant to be. The witch had been waiting for someone to break the rules, to break the glass, to release her. And now that she was free, there was no going back. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix this. Every time I tried to change the future, it just made everything worse. And now, with the witch in the mirror, with her dark presence closing in on me, I realized I was the one who had broken everything. I was the one who had let her out. And there was no escape from her. Not now, not ever. I had broken the mirror, and in doing so I had sealed our fate. Now, the witch was free, and I was her prisoner. I used to laugh at stories like this. You know the ones about haunted mirrors, cursed objects, and restless spirits. I considered myself a man of reason, grounded in the tangible world. But now I can't laugh. I can't even breathe properly. I'm trapped in this nightmare that I can't wake up from. And it all started with that damn mirror. I wasn't even looking for it when I found it. It wasn't like I was hunting for cursed antiques or anything like that. It was an estate sale, one of those old houses on the edge of town, full of forgotten junk and dusty relics. I'd been in places like it before, and nothing had ever caught my eye. But this time was different. I couldn't resist. The mirror stood in the back of the room, almost as if it were waiting for me. Tall, ornate, the frame covered in intricate carvings, twisting strange symbols I couldn't quite make sense of. The glass was old, cracked in places, but it had this strange, almost unnatural gleam to it. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It wasn't just a mirror. It was something else. Something alive. The old man who owned the house didn't say much at first, but when I reached out to touch the frame, his eyes darkened. "That's not just any mirror," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It belonged to someone with great power, someone dangerous. Be careful with it." I dismissed him. The man was obviously a little eccentric, probably just trying to sell me a piece of his imagination along with the mirror. But still, something in my gut churned as I picked it up. The mirror. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, when I decided to take it home, was the moment everything changed. I hung it in the living room. At first, it seemed harmless. Just another piece of decor, a little strange, but nothing more. Eleanor didn't think much of it either. She barely noticed the subtle shifts in the air when she walked past it, the odd flicker in the reflection. But it wasn't long before I noticed something. I felt watched. Every time I passed by the mirror, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, like someone, was lurking just beyond the glass. The reflection wasn't just a reflection. It was a presence. The first time I saw it, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. I was adjusting my tie before going out one evening when I looked into the mirror and saw my face. But it wasn't me. The smile, my smile, was too wide, too sharp. The eyes were hollow, dark, not my eyes, not my face. I blinked, and it was gone. I stood there, breathless, staring at the mirror as my reflection returned to normal. Just me. But the feeling didn't leave. It lingered in the back of my mind, nagging, turning over and over like a bitter taste I couldn't spit out. Then it started showing me more. Things. Horrible things. One night, I looked into the mirror and saw Eleanor, my wife, standing in the kitchen, completely unaware of the looming figure behind her. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was dark, too dark to make out clearly, but I knew it wasn't right. It was tall, menacing, its shape twisting in unnatural ways. It was moving toward her. It was reaching for her. I spun around, desperate to make sure she was safe, but when I looked back, the kitchen was empty. Eleanor was still there, chopping vegetables, humming to herself, blissfully unaware of the terror I had just seen. But the terror was real. I could feel it in my chest. I tried to tell her, tried to make her understand, but she laughed it off, brushing it off as stress or fatigue. I was imagining things, but I wasn't imagining it. I had seen it. I had felt it. The visions grew worse after that. Every time I looked into the mirror, I saw her in danger. Sometimes it was fire, sometimes it was water, sometimes it was something worse, something I couldn't even describe. Each time I tried to stop it, each time I tried to warn her, the more real the danger became. I started to lose myself. My grip on reality was slipping, and with each passing day I felt myself being pulled deeper into the curse that had taken hold of me. Every time I tried to change things, to prevent what I saw, the mirror seemed to twist reality, to feed on my actions, forcing the horrors to happen anyway. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to destroy it. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold on to it. I swung it at the mirror with all the strength I could muster. Crack! The first hit left a spiderweb of fractures across the glass, but it didn't break. The mirror wasn't just glass. It was something more. It was alive. I swung again, harder this time. The crack grew larger, but still, it didn't break. I kept swinging, desperate, frantic. The air around me grew colder with each blow, a biting chill that made my teeth rattle. I felt the temperature drop like I was standing in the center of a storm. And then, as if in response to my fury, it happened. The mirror cracked wide open, the glass splintering in all directions. I stood there, panting, trying to catch my breath, staring at the shattered remains of what had once been a reflection of my world. But then, nothing happened. The coldness remained. The shadows seemed to deepen. I expected relief, but all I felt was a sense of dread, as if something far worse was coming. And then I heard it. The voice. It whispered through my mind, soft and malicious, curling around my thoughts like smoke. You should have known, David. You shouldn't have broken it. You freed me. Now you'll pay the price. I spun around, heart racing, my hands trembling. The room was darker now, impossibly so. The shadows weren't just dark, they were alive. And in the corner of the room, just beyond the broken pieces of the mirror, stood the figure. The witch. Her eyes were hollow, black as the deepest pit. Her mouth twisted into a grin that spread impossibly wide. The air grew thick with her presence, choking me, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. "You thought you could destroy me?" she hissed, stepping closer, her limbs stretching unnaturally long. "I have been waiting. You freed me, and now you belong to me." I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything to escape, but my body wouldn't move. The shadows closed in around me, pressing against me, suffocating me. Her hands, those long, twisted fingers, reached out for me. And in that moment I realized what I had done. I had shattered the mirror, I had opened the door, and the witch was free. And now I was trapped. The reflection that had once shown me my world, the life I had known, was gone. It was replaced by something far darker. The mirror had never been just a reflection. It had been a doorway, and I had opened it. There was no escape. The witch wasn't just in the mirror, she was in the house, she was in me. And now I was part of her reflection, forever. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.